welcome all of you to CCHI Community Conversation celebrating Black History Month. So Berthine, please take the floor.
Thank you so much, Natalia, and thank you to CCHI for having this conversation and for the opportunity to be with this amazing panel that we have with us here. So today I'm going to introduce myself really quickly. My name is Berthine Crèvecoeur West. I am a retired interpreter. I speak 4 languages, and I was the first nationally certified Haitian Creole interpreter in the state of Georgia, from where I'm joining you right now in Metro Atlanta. And let me pass the mic so the rest of our panelists can introduce themselves. Take it away, Kenton.
Hello, my name is Kenton Myers. I am a Spanish and American Sign Language interpreter, and I work in Birmingham, Alabama. Wilda?
Hi, my name is Wilda Perez. I am a CCHI certified interpreter. I work at Boston Medical Center, and I currently interpret in English and Spanish, but I also speak French.
All righty, then the game
is... Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
yes.
Hello, my name is Abdalla Dhunkal. I am a Somali interpreter and work as a community health outreach liaison and program manager at University of Minnesota Medical Center, now known as mHealth Language Service, mHealth rather, I would say, and I work with the Department of Language Services as well as a trainer.
Yes, and I want to let the audience know that Abdalla, due to technical issues, is joining us just via audio. So, but thank you very much, everyone, for being here with us.
All right, then, everybody, let's get started. So, as I said, I'm delighted to be with this amazing group of panelists. I've been looking forward to this conversation, as I'm sure many of our listeners and attendees have. So we're just going to dive on into it. So my first question for us all is talking about the Black experience as members of the African diaspora, what this means to us, particularly being that we are all Black people, but very different, from different ethnicities, different religions, so many different parts of us, whether we're Black, we're female, we're Latinx or Latine, of the LGBTQ+ community. Tell me about how that has shaped your Blackness and your view of Blackness, because too often people ask us about the Black experience like it's a monolithic thing. And so I want us to explore Blackness and what it means to each of us. So let's start with Kenton, and then we'll pass the mic around.
We can start with Wilda. Let the ladies go first.
Oh, okay. The Black experience for me has a lot to do with identity as well. That is also not monolithic. Growing up in the Dominican Republic with Dominican parents, but my mom was very white, light skin. My father was very dark skin, and everybody looked very diverse. All kinds of the whole color scale. And then immigrating to the inner city, because we immigrated to Boston when I was 10 years old. Again, my community was represented by people who look like me, who spoke my language. For me, the Black experience really started in private school. I did really well in public school and got a scholarship to go to an independent private school near Boston. And there were no Latinos at all. I was the only Latina in this 500 people school. And so I was Black by association, right? I would hang out with the Black students. I was Blatina. So for me, the Black experience has started in this private institution kind of as this otherness, right? This uncomfortable otherness that was kind of tiptoed around, right? They're discovering, that you could be Black and Latina and queer and whatever you want to be, because as humans, we thrive on being able to share and show our true selves to others. And so for me, it was a very uncomfortable experience to be in the situation. But it's really in this discomfort that we grow, right? So learning to and also fighting, trying to fit in. But just learning to accept myself and where I came from and be proud of what I look like and be able to explain to people, not in a defensive way, who I was, took me a really long time, and it took me to Asia, and it took me backpacking all over the world where I really became comfortable with being uncomfortable. Was abroad, because in high school, you're a teenager, you're finding out who you are, you're trying to figure out, how do you fit in the world as Black and Latina, but still light-skinned, you know. And for me, it was important to just be comfortable with differences, with this discomfort. And being abroad really helped me because I couldn't hide, right? Like in Asia, people would touch my hair, like they would come up to me, they just stare. I'd have people taking pictures of me. And so initially I would just get really defensive and offended, and then I just became comfortable, and it wasn't taking me anywhere. I just wasn't comfortable all the time, and in a miserable way. So I decided that, you know what, I'm going to start having conversations with people around this, and I'm going to start saying to myself that it's okay to look different, it's okay to be different. And you know, it just goes to show what the depths of the human soul is really like, when you're able to interact people from all these different backgrounds. So that was really my experience. My initial experience with Blackness was in the United States, to be honest, when I was in a situation where I was surrounded by white people mostly, and really had to look at myself as this other, you know, and explore what that meant.
Awesome. That you just took me through a journey of, just because I was visualizing like everything that you were saying, and quite a bit of it resonated with me. But I'm going to let Kenton and Abdalla talk a little bit about that first. So who'd like to take the mic, you guys? Abdalla, you want to tackle that one?
Thank you very much again, all for having me to participate and allowing me this opportunity, so I could not only you know, join in and but talk about not only my experience, but what I have endured, what I've actually witnessed living here in Minneapolis, with regard to even some of the social unrest here, which I'll talk about in a little bit later on, I would say. Yeah, I did not have to answer your question directly. I did not have a very direct sort of experience, you know, until late 1990s, because I was born in Somalia, so I was born in Africa. Grew up, I would say, until my early teenager years in the Black communities of different languages, different ethnicities, different religious, you know, affiliations, and so forth. So I didn't have as much of a, you know, Blackness experience until I came here in the United States back in somewhere around 1997, 1998, and landed in Georgia, so where you are now. So I lived in Atlanta, you know, Cleveland Avenue and Peachtree Street, roughly. I would say not Peachtree, sorry, off of by, I can't remember, it was late, but you know, late 1990s, which I actually went back and visited around that area about 3 years ago, and it was one of the most rough neighborhoods that I could actually have, you know, imagined being a new immigrant who, at the time, luckily actually spoke English very fluently. So, and with absolutely no parents and absolutely no siblings. So you can imagine that, as of course most of you who actually have been here as immigrants. So. With that said, I've witnessed a lot of things in terms of, you know, racial tension throughout, you know, my 3 years that I lived in Georgia prior to moving here in Minnesota. You know, some of the encounters that I, you know, could recall is that we would play basketball as young teenagers, and we would get into a fight with, and you would see, you know, the atmosphere right away sort of changing pretty much within, you know, there are some Latino community members within the area as well, but also predominantly, you know, Blacks. But we would see, you know, have sometimes, you know, some brawls with some of the kids in different ethnicities, etc. So that was, I think, my first encounter that I actually realized that there was a change in the atmosphere where I grew up back in Africa to a certain, you know, extent and so forth. So. And then I came here in Minnesota, where predominantly it's white, you know, Scandinavian folks here. I'm not sure if you guys have, you know, been here in Minnesota, but, and it snows, so something that I was not used to back home in Africa. So it was quite the journey. One of the purposes why I've actually chosen here was because I had family members, and I'm not sure if some of you guys know that, but Minnesota has the largest East African communities in the United States, predominantly Somalis and also Oromo communities here that are also from Ethiopia, which are sort of neighboring, you know, neighboring countries back in Africa. So we also have a large African American community here, and then also we have a large East Asian community, specifically Hmong and Vietnamese, and now folks from Myanmar as well, different ethnic backgrounds, different races, etc. And then over the years that I've been here, about a little over 22 years, we had influx of Arab communities, Palestinians, Iraqis, Afghanis, etc. So there's a large immigrant community that have actually been, expanding. And so just I'll talk about it a little bit later on, but my office is less than, I would say, 5 minutes drive from where George Floyd was killed. Here by Minneapolis police. The police precinct that was, that dispatched the killer officer, Derek Chauvin, is literally about 4 blocks away from my office. So during the social unrest, I actually experienced firsthand, some of the, impact that George Floyd's killing actually had in the community. So I'm gonna pause there. But as far as directly answering your question, I sort of dove in as a young teenager what it means to be a Black immigrant. I should even add being Muslim, new immigrant who had actually no parents in the country, etc. in the United States back in, I would say around 1997, 1998, when I was actually growing up as a teenager, early teenager. I'll pause at that.
Thank you, Abdalla. Thank you. And now, Kenton.
I'll keep it short. I was born and raised in Atlanta. I'm obviously Black. My experience as a child was Black. It was more of, Black community integrating into all white schools, and that was kind of the pattern. But as a child, I wasn't really concerned with culture and being Black. I was just Black. And so it really wasn't until I started becoming an interpreter and learning about culture and traveling that I really started to see and care about the differences, the cultural differences, to notice racism, to notice treatment, to notice privilege that kind of came as a result of me exploring language and culture. But my childhood was very Black, as Black as you can get. Culture, food, jokes, humor, my parents. I mean, it was just I had a Black childhood, and as I went to high school and started integrating an all-white school in Atlanta, we kind of took over together, and that was the first time I started to notice, a lot of differences, a lot of things that we have to prove, a lot of, us working twice and 3 times as hard to get, a step ahead or to get what our, white counterparts were getting. And so for me, I was kind of a late bloomer when it came to noticing or paying a lot of attention to it because, as a Black male, I was trying to be the best athlete. I was trying to get the best grades. I was trying to, go to college on a scholarship. Those are more my focuses than, culture and my privilege and what, how the world sees me. So as an adult, especially this year, which I'm pretty sure we'll talk about, it's more present than ever and it's more obvious than ever. And I think as an adult, I've connected more to my Blackness, and I've seen now the influence that it's had on my life, and I see now how rooted I am in Black culture and how it affects my day to day.
Thank you, Kenton. And I'll just, from my perspective, my parents are from Haiti. I consider myself a Caribbean and a Latin person. So I was born here, left when I was 2 months old, came back at 2.5, didn't learn English until I was 5, the first day of kindergarten, essentially. So I was an American who did not speak English for a large part of my life. And so having said that, I grew up with English at school, but at home, French, Haitian Creole, and Spanish. And so my first introduction to what me, Berthine, the person, as an other, was when I was in the 3rd grade. And that's when I realized that, and it was, my otherness was pointed out by other Black children that looked like me, and yet I was different from them. And that persisted up until college, and I dare say even in university life. So for me, I've always known that I was Haitian American, and I've known what that's meant. The part about my Blackness was explaining that to other people. right? And so why do you speak these funky languages? And funky because nobody else knew them. We were the first Haitian family in our neighborhood. My high school was predominantly Asian, Jewish, and Italian. And so, then there's me, right? And so having said that, how do you explain to people, the richness and the beauty of your culture? And then to couple that, my Black experience contradicted with my Latin experience, because then how is it that this face, is a Latin person? And so people would always be like, prove that you speak Spanish. Why do I have to prove that? And so for a time, I stopped speaking Spanish. And I always say my Spanish is for family, food, and fun, right? Because that's where I can enjoy that part of my life. And so most people didn't even know I spoke Spanish. And so so my Blackness was always as an other, right? And then as Wilda was saying, became an adult and knew myself and understood, what that otherness meant to other people, right? I took it upon myself to approach it, my Blackness and how I would share that with other people as an opportunity for cross-cultural communication, right? I took it as an opportunity to show them the beauty of my culture and my heritage, the love I have, for my Haitianness, for my Dominicanness, for my Algerianness, for my Frenchness. All of that made me a Haitian person. And so I took that opportunity to share that with them. But here in the United States, I continuously find that opportunity continues to present itself, and especially during these times right now where we have all of this social unrest. I've clung to my Blackness, my Caribbeanness, my Latinness, because that makes me my Americanness. And I always try to relay that as often as I can, because we can be, as we clearly are, all of these things, right? And I think that is the beauty of our overall Blackness. It's each and every person's experience, right? Because Kenton is like, I was all Black, right? And for me, I was like, I was all Black too, as was Wilda, as was Abdalla. Right? But look at how that Blackness is so different, and look at how it's contributed to the work that we do. I dare say that that's what led us to being interpreters, right? Our shared experiences, the differences of those experiences. And so now that we're a little bit past the halfway mark, I want to keep us on track for time, you all. And as Abdalla was mentioning, he is in a space right now that does have the highest African immigrant population insofar as having people of Somali descent, people of Ethiopian descent when you're referring to the Oromo people. And so being that we were in this environment during the civil unrest that we've experienced with what I refer to as a dual trauma, with social unrest, racial unrest that has to do with, not only George Floyd, but being that you're in Minnesota, George Floyd, of course, but then with the global pandemic. So how does being an interpreter, particularly a Black interpreter during this pandemic, how has it affected your work life already? So let's start with Abdalla, and then we'll work our way backwards around.
Thank you again, for actually not only organizing this, but also, letting all of us, share our experiences during this panel here. Hopefully that will reach out to many folks as well. To answer your question directly, it's actually very, very challenging. Here in Minnesota, we have a large health disparity, comparing to, if you want to call it the white, Caucasian, community here versus, other people of color, including Latinos, African descendant, the Arabs, etc. And predominantly, as we all know, having to have been in the medical field, whether we are interpreters or, did other work in the field, not only the language barrier is an issue, but the Western biomedical culture itself is also, a challenge for many immigrants in particular that, are used to different, medical systems. And if I can elaborate, in short period of time here, for folks that are in East Africa, healthcare is free back home. All the paperwork are basically, attended and patients welcomed by either the nursing staff or the nursing assistant. So pretty much there's not a whole lot of booklets, if you want to call it, at times what we get involved as interpreters, because I myself am also a CCHI certified, and I see patients sometimes, even though that's not my primary role. So no forms to fill out, no medical insurance requirements, predominantly rather than prevention, which is the methodology here in the Western biomedical culture, was not something of an emphasis or a focus in back in East Africa or in Somalia in particular. So there's a lot of variations that not only patients have to jump through, and on top of that, complicating it with the language barrier is also becomes a deficiency at some point. So we had. I used to be part of a coalition here, East African Health Coalition, that was actually founded here in Minnesota, where we actually, demanded accountability within the organizations that, specifically Department of Human Services and Department of Health, MDH here, where actually we formed a panel and then helped identify ways that could be mitigated in terms of outreach. And this started when we had the measles outbreak here. I'm not sure if some of you guys might have actually learned about this as well, because there are some kids that were born here in the US, just like Bertha, traveled back home in East Africa, and weren't vaccinated at the time for the lack of either knowledge or other issues that were actually engulfing some parents to actually say, absolutely, I don't want my child to be vaccinated with MMR, and then contracting measles, and then coming back home, and then spreading that like a wildfire, including not only other kids that were not vaccinated in the East African community, but other kids as well, and elderlies that were actually more susceptible to such contraction and so forth. So we actually intervened, many of us in the public health world here. Some of us were interpreters, including myself, but I also have a public health degree, and then I'm actually a candidate of masters in both MHA and masters in health administration and public health as well. So then we actually reached out to, sorry, go ahead, please.
I didn't want to interrupt, but I want to keep us all on track for time because we've got about 8 minutes left. So I want to make sure everybody in there.
I will be short here. So many of us actually, were able to get involved in the initiative of at least, trying to combat some of those challenges. So for the sake of time, I know that we don't have as much time, but I only wanted to point out not only the language barrier is an issue, but the medical setting itself and people who come from different countries, that it's, in the Western biomedical culture also poses, deficiency for, not being aware of how decisions are made, how diagnoses are made, what sort of emphasis and focuses are actually, done in the medical field, etc. So I'm gonna pause there and give opportunity for other speakers as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So Wilda, how has being an interpreter, particularly a Black interpreter, affected your work and your life?
Well, I think it's affected me. It's, again, the word discomfort, right? This uncomfortableness of now having to do my work with masks, with distance. There's this paranoia about getting sick, insecurities about what's going to happen in the future. So, there's a lot of new, it's changed the way not only interpreters work, but it's changed a lot of things in the world today. I kind of want to focus on kind of sitting with this discomfort and the pain. I did a Vipassana meditation course in Myanmar in my 20s, and part of this 10-day meditation course, there's this aspect of noble silence to it, right? Where you don't speak to people, you don't speak to other the participants, and you don't try to engage with them either with eye contact or gestures. It's really a time to go inward and sort of explore, what's going inside, working on your own, digging up your own traumas and your own, introspection, so that you can just be a better person and be able to connect with others in a different level. And on the last day of the meditation, you break noble silence, and then you're able to speak, and I didn't even speak the same languages as these women, but I felt so connected with them. Like the energy that we shared. And I'm not telling people to go around and start, interacting with people's energies if that's not your thing. But but really take this time to go inward and really make that room for change and make that room for growth, and really sit with all this trauma and work on your resilience. And that way you can kind of emerge to a place where you can have deeper connections with others in more meaningful ways. And I know that this has been really challenging for all of us, because touch was like a really comforting way to interact with others, right? And now everybody is sort of like in this in between where like, oh, I can't really approach you, so I'm just going to ignore you. And we have to be creative about how we interact with each other and how we can create deeper, more meaningful connections without touch or being distant. So I encourage everyone to be creative. The eyes are the windows to the soul. There's a lot you can say to others just by looking at them, by nodding your head, gestures, waving, remote, like how we're all kind of adjusting to working remotely and interacting via video. People can write letters. I just encourage everyone, this is a difficult time we're all going through, and I just encourage everyone to take that time to be introspective so that you can emerge and sort of have more. I think it's asking us, like, how do we move forward and how do we create deeper, more meaningful relationship with others?
Thank you, Wilda. Thank you. And Kenton, what is your view on COVID as it pertains to you as a Black interpreter? What does that mean? And I was told by Natalia we have a few more moments, so we have a little extra time. Thanks, Natalia.
I'll keep it short. My perspective is a little bit different because I am an American Sign Language interpreter as well. And in the American Sign Language world, Black males are the smallest group. And as a result of Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, we are in the highest demand right now because, in American Sign Language with deaf people, you tend to want Black males signing and interpreting for Black deaf males and females, that kind of thing. And so for me, it was kind of a little bit of what Wilda touched on, but self-care. We did a lot of interpreting during Black Lives Matter, during George Floyd, and then this month, all of the panels about Blackness and trauma and experience and Me Too. And we're interpreting all of these things, all of these stories by Black and Brown people, trauma. And so we experience a lot of vicarious trauma, having to do that on a daily basis. And then with COVID, we still did the same amount, but everything just shifted online. So, I mean, we get thousands of requests for panels all over the country, Black and Brown stories, trauma, hurt, our stories, and it's just a lot to have to interpret all day, every day. And working in remotely, you have time zones. So, I'm working for somebody in California. I end up working, until 12 o'clock at night and things like that. And so it was just a lot of just emotional, like checking in with myself a lot and just making sure that I was protecting myself, making sure that these powerful stories that we interpret every day, we didn't internalize them. And then we had my own personal struggles and things that I was dealing with personally that I had to kind of learn to create boundaries and learn to say no and make sure I was taking care of myself and that kind of thing. And so it's really pulled all of the Black American Sign Language interpreters across the nation together, and we all for the first time have been able to work together, because in Alabama, for example, there are 4 certified Black ASL interpreters period in the entire state, and there are only 2 males, me being one of them, and we live 5 hours away from each other. So to have the opportunity to be able to work, I mean, the other day was the first time that I had worked with a full Black team of American Sign Language interpreters, and it didn't hit me until we all came on the screen at the end, and I was just like, wow. And so it was something I think I took for granted until I had the opportunity to see it live, and since then it's been something that we've been really advocating for, and trying to make sure that Blackness doesn't get covered by new terms like BIPOC, Black Indigenous People of Color. A lot of times that's become like the PC way of saying Black. Instead of saying we need a Black interpreter, they'll say BIPOC or Black Indigenous person of color, and that's their way of kind of like back in the day when you used to say like African American, because for some reason a lot of people think Black was like a cuss word or a bad word or something you don't call someone. So we're still in that right now. So that's been my experience as an American Sign Language interpreter in America.
Wow, you guys, I feel like these stories are almost testimonials, right, about what we're going through. But I also see that this is a way for us to to not only come together in a different way, reinvent what, you know, our contact, our communication, the way we show care, right? Be it as interpreters linguistically or as individuals personally, how we show care to people, right? Or through sign for that matter. For me, I feel, being that I don't interpret anymore, but I always am an interpreter in my heart as a business owner that deals with a lot of diversity work, cultural competence work, which has to do with interpreting. I realized that I needed to evolve through this pandemic. It wasn't just enough for me to come out of it okay, right? And an evolution meant a transformation, a reinvention of how we meet, how I reach out to people, how people are able to connect with me. But it also meant saying no and having to draw into myself internally and kind of water my garden so I would be all right to be a servant leader like we all are in our fields, right? And so to your point, it was something that I had not done before, because now I had time. I was busier than ever, but now I had time to just sit with myself and be uncomfortable, like Wilda was saying, and be like, all right, what now, right? What now? And so my what now became, I'm going to reach out to as many people as I can, but also set boundaries for my time, right? And that became so important because, as Kenton mentioned, self-care is really the name of the game. If we are constantly trying to help people while helping them and telling their stories, we're internalizing a lot of that. And so what that looked like for me on the diversity side of things, the cultural competence side of things, was saying no to a bunch of groups that, to your point, Kenton, BIPOC, right? That kind of whitewashes my blackness, and, you know, no pun intended, but eliminates my another colleague's indigenousness, right? Because person of color, we're all people of color. White is a color in the crayon box, so we're all people of color, in my opinion, right? So how are we going to just use more of these PC terms to just get away with stuff? And I think that that's the interpreter side of me that's like, no, our words are our tools, and we need to be accurate, right? And that means we can't be lazy and just use whatever the term is for the day. And so I had a lot of clients, especially as Abdalla was talking about George Floyd, I had a lot of clients reach out, potential clients wanting me to talk about diversity. But I had to say no, because I had to realize they only wanted me to talk about diversity. They didn't want to do anything about it. Right. And for me, it's more than a noun. It's an action verb, right? It's a word. And I was just like having to say no. And that helped me evolve and sharpen my tools, right? And so now, being that Natalia gave us a couple more minutes, I'm going to ask our last question, right? And more so than how do we celebrate Black history, I want to get into the other side of it. What is your view on the future role of Black interpreters in the healthcare interpreting field? And so, Wilda, we're going to start off with you.
Well, we need more diversity for sure. Like I'm like a novelty when I interpret for the Latino community. Like it boggled my mind that there's Latinos that don't see, it's like you're invisible. Like, and also there's Colombia, Brazil, there's so many American countries that have large Afro-Latino populations, and we're still invisible, you know, like people comment on my hair, if not once a day, like multiple times a week. I like your hair. Or they think I'm not Latina, right? They comment on like, oh, your Spanish is so clear. You speak Spanish so well. And I'm like, well, why shouldn't I? So it's sort of like, I think we just need to be visible, right? We need to get more programs out there. And I'm going to put in a plug for FIT, Found in Translation. It's the program where I got my certificate from. It's a program for low-income bilingual women in the Boston area, and it's a comprehensive program. It gives you the tools to get an interpreter certificate. They support you with job interviews. If they have childcare, if you don't have a suit, they'll get you a suit. If you need a babysitter so you can go to an interview, they'll get you the babysitter. So it's really, we need to equip our community with the tools to follow their dreams. And so we need more visibility. We need to really demonstrate how diverse the Latino community is. And so that it's not, when I go into an encounter, the patient isn't distracted by me, that they're really not paying attention to the doctor. I mean, I've had patients be in an appointment with me after I introduce myself and not pay attention to the doctor and what I'm interpreting, because they're looking at me and they're trying to figure out where I'm from and why I speak Spanish. And I take this as an opportunity to just educate and, inform and say, I am Latina, I am Dominican, we are diverse, we speak Spanish well. So, I don't get offended. I just, if they ask to touch my hair, I say, no, thanks. And if they ask too many questions, I try to redirect them, and I try to take it as an opportunity so they learn about me and my culture and where I come from, and that we're diverse and that we're complex, and that we can be great interpreters.
Awesome, awesome. And yes, don't touch my hair. What is that? Something as I've never understood culturally, ethnically, as an American, as a Haitian. I just don't get it. What if I'm having a really not good hair day? What if my hair needs to be washed? I don't understand that fascination. But yes, get off of my head. Okay, Kenton, you take it. What's your take on it?
A lot of the things that Wilda touched on, like just personally, when you show up and you start speaking Spanish, you introduce yourself in Spanish, and they're distracted, like you can't speak Spanish, like you can't be, or they start trying to figure out where you're from, and they start naming off all the countries where traditionally people are darker. They're like, oh, you must be from the Dominican Republic or Panama. It's just, I go, okay. And so that kind of thing, feeling invisible, like I think the lack of awareness that we are a diverse group of people. And so exactly what she said. And also it goes both ways, because a lot of times when, Americans, Black people, they'll hear, me speak Spanish, and then here comes the ignorance, like, oh man, you sound like a real Mexican, or how is it that you speak Spanish, and I'm just like, there's no, and I attribute that to just ignorance. It's coming from a place of support, because that's one thing Black people will do. We walk into a room, the head nod, or we understand, like, it's so good to see you here, but there's a lot of ignorance behind it. And so when we show up in these spaces where people traditionally aren't used to seeing people that look like us speaking Spanish fluently, for example, based on lack of exposure, then we get those kind of stereotypical ignorant comments that we have to mediate and fight our battles if it's worth educating or if it's worth thanks and keep it moving, that kind of thing. But yeah, I would just like to see more diversity. There aren't a lot of interpreters that look like me here, where I am, either. And so when I do see, yeah,
Literally two in the
yeah,
entire state. Makes no sense.
yeah, and so when patients and clients see me, one, there's a lot of pressure, because I feel like I do have to prove myself, because they're looking like, oh, you don't look Latino or Hispanic, so I feel like there's not that trust there. And then outside of just a lack of trust, I feel like you have to work harder, and easier or more easily remembered. And so the job that you do is more impressionable, or it's more lasting with those people. So it's very easy to say, oh, there was a, Hispanic woman, blah, blah, blah. Oh no, there was a Black man. He looked Black. The
He
description's
was Black.
easier. He was Black. And other descriptors, but I mean, it's just easier to identify, a small group of people. And so I feel like there's more weight in the work that we do. And so, yeah, I would like to see more diversity.
Awesome. Thank you, Kenton. And Abdalla, what do you think the future role for Black interpreters in the healthcare profession is? What is that to you?
I honestly think, more collaboration, more, at least learning from one another, because I just learned a lot of things right now, with, Kenton and Wilda and you having all different backgrounds, speak different languages, some, of course, as American Sign Language, etc. I think this interactive among us, as I think beautifully Kenton put it, being one of two Black men who are ASL interpreters in the entire state of Alabama. I mean, to have just even seen folks who are in the profession, who look like him, who act like him, as he said, and who of course that he can relate to more. I think I would even go beyond that and probably even say Not only that we need to advocate for one another in the communities that we serve, whether we're immigrants or non-immigrants, etc., but also in the fashion of the profession that we're in as Black communities serving different diverse groups. We ought to, basically have a better relationship and a better collaboration to advance not only the careers of next generations, but also making it easy for them to get into the process. I'll leave it at that.
Awesome, thank you, Abdalla. And I'll just round it out by saying that everyone's story resonated with me so deeply today, so I'm glad I got to partake of this. For me, what I see as the future of Black interpreters is definitely about those two things, representation and support, but also, and using my own experiences when I was interpreting, what I noticed was that Blackness factor, if you will, it always did lead people to, what are you here for today? And that's just when I walked into a facility, right? Because they didn't expect to see me. People have an idea that an interpreter, Gloria Estefan is not always going to show up, right? And I'm just going to be real about that. Interpreters look great. I'm not going to do a dance. I'm not going to, and even amongst my own Haitian people, who, like Wilda on her side of the island, I like to say it's two sisters because it's one place, right? On the other side of the island, people, Dominicans and Haitians look the same. And people are always, insofar as our variants, right? And people, when I would walk in, the LEPs themselves, the Haitian ones, would be like, what are you doing here? Because you sound like this, so you can't possibly speak Creole, right? You can't possibly speak French. And then when you do start doing that, they become so surprised that they are focused on you and, oh my goodness, this diaspora, this American person speaks our language. And we have to oftentimes remind not only them, but the providers that we are of both cultures, right? We are of many cultures, right? And I just think support has to happen also from the interpreting profession itself. Interpreters, like all other people, are subject to biases. And that's a part of the reason why at one point I just didn't bother mentioning that I spoke Spanish at all to interpreting colleagues because of the reactions that I would get. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to worry about that then. Let me take that off my plate. But then that stops me from showing up as my authentic self. And so now I claim that because I realize one thing about us all: when we don't show up as our authentic selves, society loses. Not only do we lose, but society loses. So I do think that representation matters, support matters, right? From outside as well as from inside, but as Black interpreters, the onus is on us to be the ambassadors of who we are, the diaspora of who we are, the beautiful, mosaic that we represent globally. And we have to do that locally in each of the areas in which we serve, right? Because at the end of the day, interpreters are servant leaders. And sometimes that means taking our colleagues, our fellow brother and sister interpreters by the hand and saying, look, this, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. So the next person that comes behind me that looks like me won't have to experience that kind of ostracism, right? And so, we want to make sure that, we're able to be our best, show up as our authentic selves, but we need support and we need representation. So I'm going to close it out on that end to my amazing panel today that I get to be a part of. Wilda, Kenton, Abdalla, thank you so much. To CCHI, Natalia, and Jorge in particular, thank you for inviting us all to be a part of this wonderful celebration. And to Wilda's point, when we were talking in the green room, we want to celebrate Blackness in every form, every day of the year, because it doesn't start in February and it doesn't go away in March. And so for CCHI to have us partake in this conversation, I feel like that's a very important first step. So let's all keep the conversation going. Thank you so much, and I'll pass the mic to Natalia.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I am always amazed at when we start talking to each other, how rich everybody's background and experience is. I mean, I thought I knew Berthine because I worked with her on a couple of projects. I thought I knew about Kenton because, we met at a couple of conferences. I haven't met Wilda, and I think I met Abdalla once on a conference in person, but so much to learn and so much to enjoy. And I am very grateful for you saying that Black is not a bad word because, it seems, I understand political correctness, I understand the language and nuances of language, but sometimes the most direct and most obvious thing is the easiest one to comprehend and understand. And I also want to thank you for bringing up the fact of that surprise that some people experience, because I work from Akron, Ohio, and one of my Russian interpreters is from Uganda. You know, was from Uganda before I worked with CCHI. So you can imagine how Russian patients in America would react to seeing a Black person coming to speak Russian, like, who the heck are you, right? So it is a very interesting thing. And when I look at our conferences, in-person conferences, and I don't see very many Black interpreters, I always wonder, like, they all learn foreign language in school too. It's not like they are, not interpret. We do have Black interpreters in our community, but I think we need to do more to support each other and give each other visibility. And I think one of the silver linings of this pandemic is allowing us to have these virtual events when we could give the platform to people who may not see in person. So thank you for being with us. I look forward to continuing this conversation in the future with you and with other interpreters who are Black, who come from other, ethnic groups. The different issues we're all experiencing, but we are united by the fact that we're interpreters, and we can joke about patients and providers together, right? So thank you, everyone. Thank you, our attendees, for staying with us longer than usual, and enjoy the rest of your Friday. And as Berthine said, and as we talked amongst each other before this call, please don't stop talking about this today or next week. It is our life, and it is present. And if we verbalize it, we understand it better, and we become part of this experience. So thank you, and have a wonderful weekend. Bye, everyone. And
Bye.
Abdalla, thank you for being with us via audio, because I know how hard it is without the webcam on. Bye.